And I'm going to spend a few hours on this midsummer day exploring the area in southeast Ohio called the Hocking Hills. And if you're from the Buckeye State, that name should sound familiar to you. And if you're not, come enjoy the beauty here. This park is known for its spectacular waterfalls and rock formations, and plenty of plants for us to admire as well. So we're going to concentrate on the common trees of Hocking Hills area in Hocking County, Ohio. And our first stop today is along the Big Pine Creek, and this is the Big Pine Creek right underneath this footbridge here. This is called the Conkles Hollow Nature Preserve. And Conkles Hollow is a small stream that feeds into the Big Pine Creek right here. And we'll get started on the trees right away here, folks. This is early morning. Still nice and cool. Going to be a warm day, up around 90, but in the shade it won't feel that hot. And I haven't put this tree on this channel yet, but most of the trees I'm going to record today have been put on this channel. And this one will end up on there eventually. Here's the compound leaves of our butternut, which is, you think butternut, think bottomlands. It'll also grow in old fields, and often does, but this is where it wants to grow in nature, and before European settlement, this is where you probably would have found it the most. It has this very large compound leaf with over a dozen leaflets that come off in a staggered pattern. And they can get quite large, and they're closely related to the black walnut. The heartwood of the butternut tree is a lighter color than black walnut, but still pleasing to the eye when you're making furniture. And one way you can tell the compound leaves of a butternut tree from those of a walnut, because they do look very similar, is the butternut tree often keeps its terminal leaflet, or the one at the very end, and the black walnut does not normally. So that's how we can tell them apart when they're in the sapling form, like this tree here, and the bark is not different enough to tell them apart. They are easy to tell apart once the trees are mature, but in the sapling form, not so easy. And I'm expecting to find 3 species of birch growing in this park today. There are 3 growing here. We'll see if we can find them. The one that we need to look for along the streams only is our river birch. And I've got more information on the river birch on this channel. I recorded it in West Virginia a few years ago. But we've got a leaf here with very large teeth, with smaller teeth in between them. So it's so when you call a tree leaf toothed, it can either be doubly toothed or singly toothed, and this one is doubly toothed. So we got a larger leaf tooth with smaller teeth along the way between the teeth. We'll see if we can get that to come into focus a little better there. So that's one way we can tell this river birch leaf from those of the black birch and the yellow birch. The teeth, the bigger teeth in this doubly toothed leaf are much larger than those of the other 2 birches we're going to try to look for today. And the bark of this river birch we can get a better look at in just a second here. And we'll resume on. In the background there is a large river birch that is laid down, probably from being undercut by the stream. And on that upper branch that's going vertical here, we've got all kinds of flaking. So the river birch is known for its bark that exfoliates or flakes. And so do some of the other birches as well. The yellow birch and the paper birch are known for that as well, but this looks different. It's more of an orangish brown color, and as the trees get larger, they actually live up to their botanical name, which is Betula nigra, which means a black birch, and the bark does get quite a dark color on the largest trees. And before we start our hike up Conkles Hollow, let's look at a common tree of the bottomlands in the Ohio Valley and lower Great Lakes. And this is our shellbark hickory. I have a nickname for this. I'm going to call it the fireworks hickory, because where the leaflets come out of the end of this branch, it looks like a fireworks going off. They come off in all directions. So I should say not leaflets, but leaves come off the end of this branch in all directions. And the shellbark hickory has compound leaves with normally more than 5 leaflets. I've got several segments on the shellbark hickory on this channel, including winter identification and summer identification. But it is a shaggy bark hickory, just like the shagbark hickory, so it can be differentiated from that tree by the number of leaflets on the compound leaf. I'm looking at 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 on this one in the foreground here. And the nuts are actually larger as well. So the purpose of this hike today is to give you an overview of the beauty of this park and some of the common trees as we find them. And the detailed information on identifying these trees is on this channel, and I won't go into great detail for that reason. And the trail through Conkles Hollow is handicap accessible and a concrete sidewalk. And then there's about a 2-mile loop that goes above Conkles Hollow on the cliff tops that has a lot of steps. So you can actually see a lot of plants on this handicap accessible trail that are common to the Hocking Hills State Park and the surrounding Appalachian regions. This is the lower foothills of the Appalachian Mountains here. There's no elevation here of any significance, but the plants here are common in the Appalachian Mountains. So west of here, we're into the more the Midwestern plants, and the two overlap right here. The Midwest and the Appalachian plants. This is a common tree in the understory of the Appalachian Mountains at the low to mid elevations. You get up high enough, you don't find it. And this is our witch hazel. And if you think witch hazel, think wavy potato chips, like the potato chips with the wavy edge, and that's what the edge of these leaves looks like. And when you think witch hazel, think Thanksgiving and Halloween, because that's when it flowers. It starts flowering around Halloween, when most of the leaves have already dropped to the ground, and continues flowering right up to around Thanksgiving. I've got some more information on what those flowers look like. I videoed it in the West Virginia New River Gorge a few years ago in the late fall when it was in flower. But it's an understory tree, doesn't get more than 20 feet high, and catches the sunlight that these larger trees let through. And I'm going to keep my voice very low. And you know, we plan these trips with certain goals in mind, including tree identification, but if Mother Nature provides the opportunity, let's comment on what we're finding here. There's a couple of barred owls sitting on this split rail fence up here. And boy, you know, I don't really ever see them sitting this close to a trail that gets a lot of people. And they're more active at night. Maybe they're trying to get a little extra rest this morning. Hi guys. So the wildlife at this park is amazing too. I mean, I'm hearing wood thrushes this whole trip so far. And the rock formations are the main attraction, but just the whole natural immersion in the natural world makes this park an incredible place, and it's very popular for that reason. I would recommend a weekday visit, especially during the vacation season in the summer. And there they go. And as you continue up Conkles Hollow, the cliffs, which this park is known for, get closer to the trail to the point where you're almost touching them. And a little later on, we're going to take a hike up to a trail that goes over the top of these cliffs. And large variety of plants. There's a big difference in the plants that grow on top of the cliffs where it's drier and hotter, as opposed to this hollow where it stays moist year-round because of the protection from the sun. Well, as we come up this hollow here, we lose the river birch. River birch grows along medium to large-sized streams in the Appalachian area of Ohio and West Virginia and surrounding states. But usually you don't find it on these little streams. But hugging the banks of this little stream here is our black birch. And the teeth along the edge of this black birch here have that double-E tooth, so there's a large tooth with several small teeth in between them, but the large teeth are much smaller. Just maybe about 1/8 of an inch at the most. So the margin of the edge of the leaf on this black birch is much different, and the geometry of the leaf is a little different too. It's more oval, and the river birch is a little more triangular. And if we take just a scratch with our thumb a little bit of the bark of this black birch, we can find out why it has another name called the sweet birch. You can smell the oil of wintergreen in the bark. And the bark of this tree was used to make root beer and birch beer in the past. Now that's being done in a laboratory with manufactured chemicals. But it can be done with these trees. If you can harvest them in your own property, you wouldn't be allowed to do that here, obviously, in a state nature preserve. But the bark of the black birch is actually more of a brown or bronzes color with these little horizontal lines, about 1/4 inch long. They remind us it's a birch. So the alders and the birches often get these horizontal lines on the bark. The black birch is one of the few trees that doesn't peel at all until it gets very large. Here's one here reaching up towards the top of these cliffs, and the bark is still smooth. If this were a river birch or a yellow birch or a paper birch, this bark at this size would be peeling. As the black birch gets much larger, it develops some plates on the bark, but not till it's about 1.5 feet, 2 feet in diameter. And as you approach the end of Conkles Hollow, the cliffs come right up to the trail. And the eastern hemlock is growing straight above us. We'll have to get a better look at that, but it's a common tree in these moister soils of these ravines here at the Hocking Hills State Park. This is so narrow here, you can actually hear an echo. And you can hear the waterfall behind me. We'll stop for just a minute and dim down the lights, or brighten up the light settings so we can see this in the shade here. And it's still early in the morning, and the sun doesn't really get high enough to come into this holler till much later in the day. So we're going to have to listen to this waterfall more than we can see it. But I think it's a bullfrog or a green frog sitting right there, kind of guarding the waterfall. He's sitting right on that rock there, making some noises, like a banjo string type noise. I believe it's a bullfrog. And then this slot in the Blackhand sandstone, which is the name of this rock unit here, has a waterfall. It's just dripping today, but if you come here on a rainy day, you can avoid the crowds and really see these waterfalls get gushing. Of course, if it gushes too much, the trail could become unusable. And the handicap accessible part of this trail does end about a couple hundred yards before you get to this waterfall. So the rest has to be done on foot without a wheelchair. But it's not a difficult trail. There's our bullfrog. Kind of like the guardian of this the waterfall here. And along the walk into Conkles Hollow here, we found our third species of birch. This is the one that's probably the least common in Ohio. It is found in places, but not as common as the black birch or the river birch. And if you find yellow birch, which is more comfortable in the cooler climates to our north and in the higher elevations of the Appalachian Mountains, and even into southern Canada. So it likes a cool, moist ravine here. These rocks and these hemlock trees above us here help keep it in the shade. And our bark peels even at a young age. And you can see the yellowish bronze hue to this tree. And the bark peels till the trees get much larger. Eventually it gets more blocky, just like the black birch does when the trees get extremely large. But this is an easy one to tell in the wintertime because of the peeling bark and the color of the bark. And the bark, if you find a fallen tree from any of these birches that peel, the barks have oil in them that allows it to burn when wet. It'd be good. You can harvest that bark, where allowed, from a fallen tree and use it as a fire starter in a survival situation. And here's our teeth here. Again, doubly toothed along the margins of this leaf. These leaves are on average a little bit larger than that of the black birch. And let's just take a look at the teeth along the margin of this yellow birch leaf. Again, they're no more than a 1/16 inch in size, and there's a large tooth with a small tooth in between if you look carefully, but it's nowhere near as obvious as the double tooth on the river birch. So normally you don't find them growing side by side unless somebody's planted them side by side. Now, one variety of birch that does not grow in this part of the mid-Ohio Valley and lower central Appalachians is called the gray birch. It grows further to our north. It has a doubly toothed leaf that could almost look like that of a river birch, but the bark is much different. But all this information is on this channel, and we'll just stop right here and continue on. And we got 3 birches in the bag already. I think we could probably find at least 2 pine trees growing on this hike, and possibly 3 different pines. And one of the more common trees in the central and southern Appalachians and surrounding areas of the Ohio Valley and lower Great Lakes is the tulip poplar tree. It grows straight, it grows tall, and as tall as any other tree in the forest, if not taller. With beautiful flowers in the mid-spring. And a unique looking leaf that is almost shaped like a tulip itself. And this is one of the more commercially important species around here, especially for lumbering, making, it's a great wood for making furniture. It stains pretty well and is easy to work with. And is very common in the moister soils of these hills and hollers in the Appalachians. Get up where it's real hot and dry and you start finding a lot of oaks, you're less likely to find the tulip poplar. It's got that evenly furrowed bark and straight appearance in most cases. And I just did about a 10 or 12 minute segment on the tulip poplar with its leaves and flowers back in May of this year, 2021, as well as a winter appearance done the year before in December. And that can be found on this channel. And one of the more common evergreens in these moister soils of Conkles Hollow and the surrounding areas is the eastern hemlock. As far as I can tell, these have not been heavily damaged by the hemlock woolly adelgid yet, partly because there isn't a lot of hemlock in all the areas of this part of the Midwest and Ohio Valley, so the adelgid may not have had a chance to get here without getting blown long distances without hemlock trees for a host. Our eastern hemlock has a flat needle that's no more than a ½ inch long. It's very shiny on top. With a white stripe on the bottom, actually 2 white stripes. And here we can get a better look at the bottom of the needle of this eastern hemlock as it comes into focus there. So the bottom has the 2 white stripes The green line in between. The top is a darker green that's very shiny and no more than a ½ inch long. Balsam and Fraser firs have flat needles like that with a similar stripe on the bottom, but the needles are much longer. They don't grow in this park or anywhere near this park. And above that cool ravine with the birch trees and the hemlocks, we've got an evergreen up here that's up to the challenge of living on a hilltop. This is the rim trail around Conkles Hollow. So the paved trail is 1 mile total if you go out and back. The rim trail is 2.5 with quite a few steps and rocks that you have to climb up over. So more of a moderately difficult hike. But clinging to this rock face here is our Virginia pine. So if you think Virginia pine, think growing in a place where other trees don't want to grow or can't grow. I've got more information on the Virginia pine on this channel. But just a brief overview, it has needles of 2 that are twisted together. Let's see if we can get a better look at this. So the needles come in pairs and they almost always twist around each other as they emerge from the branch. They tend not to be that long on this tree. They're usually less than 3 inches long. The pitch pine and the white pine, which are often found in this park as well, have longer needles. And the pitch pines come in 3s and the white pines come in 5s. And the cones on this Virginia pine tend to hang on to the branches for years before they fall to the ground. And they're fairly small cone. I can't touch one from here. Less than 3 inches long. So Virginia pine can grow on thin soils and rocky soils. It often grows on road cuts in Appalachia and in abandoned farmland that was, heavily eroded and poor soil quality. And right behind these pitch pines on the lip of Conkles Hollow here is one of the more common oaks in the Appalachian Mountains. I don't find it too much west of here in the flatter areas of Ohio. But our scarlet oak puts on quite a show in the fall. It gets a bright crimson color. The leaves are quite deeply notched. And they're smooth on both sides. Even shiny on both sides. It wouldn't be common to find this growing next to a pin oak. I would not expect it to grow next to a pin oak because of different habitat requirements, but the leaves do resemble that of a pin oak. The acorns do not, and the bark somewhat resembles that of a pin oak. But on these ridge tops, the oak tree with the deeply notched leaves would be your scarlet oak, and occasionally the black oak. And we continue studying our scarlet oak just a little further down the trail here. Similar view from this ledge top here. I showed the notched leaves, smooth on both sides. The bark of the scarlet oak tends to be smooth on the smaller branches, and as the tree gets larger, the bottom half tends to be chunky in little shapes like polygons and squares and pentagons and heptagons. So the smooth leaves on both sides and the fact that the bark is not consistently chunky the whole way up separates it from the black oak, which often grows on these mountainsides as well. And we've got some mature Virginia pine bark. So this is what the bark looks like on a larger Virginia pine with some little, again, plates, maybe 3 or 4 inches across. And looking up Conkles Hollow, we're above where that waterfall was. It would be back in the notch between those 2 rocks there. So we're kind of going around the upper part of the holler now. And the view is incredible. And if you want to see something incredible in early spring, I'm seeing a lot of this along this cliff edge. It doesn't seem to mind the thin soil. This serviceberry has a leaf that's the same size as a black and yellow birch. And it has teeth like a black and yellow birch, but the teeth are single and not doubly toothed. Gets incredible white showy flowers in early spring, usually around April 1st, maybe the 10th of April, depending on your location. But in southern Ohio, I would say better earlier than later. It's one of the first trees to bloom before the dogwoods and before the redbuds usually. And these branches would be covered in showy white flowers. And if there's any doubt about the bark, the serviceberry does not have the little horizontal lines that the birches have. So it's a smooth gray bark, and that's one way you can tell it apart from the birches if the leaves are confusing you. We'll continue around the lip of this holler here and see if we can find some more oaks and some more pines to look at. And the leaves of our black oak tree are a darker green and a duller green. They don't shine as much as the scarlet oak, but they are often found in the same habitat. And on these leaves that are from this little sapling, they often get these little prickles or spines on the end, and a orangish hair on the bottom. And it's a rougher feel than the scarlet oak. It doesn't feel smooth at all, at least on these saplings. If you find a larger black oak tree, the leaves on the upper branches often do look like that of a scarlet oak. Here's another oak that's real common in the Appalachian Mountains. And I've seen it in southern Indiana, but only in the hills, not in the flatter areas. And the flatter areas of the lower Great Lakes and Ohio Valley do not have this chestnut oak, which is very common in the central and southern Appalachians, all the way up to southern New England at the lower elevations. It's got a deeply furrowed bark. You can often get orange stripes or an orange color in the bottom of these furrows, but on the larger tree, these furrows can be 4 or 5 inches deep. My joke is, mirror, mirror on the wall, which is the most furrowed oak of all? And that would be the chestnut oak. We can get a better look at these leaves here while looking up, and we'll find some saplings to get a better look at those leaves as well. But they often resemble the leaves of another type of oak called the chinkapin oak, which does not share the same habitat. And just a couple hundred yards down the trail here, we do have a chestnut oak with some low-hanging branches, so we can get a real good look at these leaves. So I mentioned it was similar to that of the chinkapin oak. It has a wavy edge, almost like the edge of that witch hazel, almost like the edge of a Ruffles potato chip. Chinkapin oak tends to have the waves where the waves are like white caps, and they're more pointed in places. Not always, but often. Different habitat requirements. This chestnut oak is acid loving, growing on these sandstone ledges here. The chinkapin oak is more on the limestone ledges, but there's places in Kentucky where there's mountains that have a limestone sandstone sandwich where you actually can find both growing almost next to each other down there around Berea. My other channel, I did a hike up Lily Mountain, Kentucky back in the winter. That channel's called Let's Dig a Little Deeper, LET''S, Dig a Little Deeper, and the hike was called Late Winter Hike Up Lily Mountain, Kentucky, and I found both those trees growing close to each other that day. But our wavy edge on this chestnut oak and the deeply furrowed bark make it easy to tell from the other oaks and other trees in the forest, and it's a very common tree in the Appalachian Mountains. Wherever you have thin rocky soil, you can almost always find the chestnut oak, unless that thin rocky soil is made of limestone, of course. And I can say with certainty that you're never far from hemlock trees on this hike around Conkles Hollow. It's a common tree throughout this hike. Got those short needles. The bark has these long ridges in it. It can get little blocks at the bottom when the trees are really large. We're going to do some hikes later this afternoon in a different park where the hemlock trees may be larger, but once the hemlock trees get started, the shade is deep enough. It's hard for other trees to send up saplings. Pretty much everything growing underneath this grove of hemlocks here is herbaceous plants and not tree seedlings. So once they get started and take over, they remain, and the other trees really can't take over and succeed them. And I would be remiss to not film some of the rock formations at Hocking Hills here as well. This is still at Conkles Hollow here. Just a little drip coming over this wet weather waterfall, but after heavy rains it'd be quite the sight to see. And probably going to head over to the old man's cave area after lunch today. And tends to get real crowded over there, but it's also very scenic as well with similar rock formations. Again, these hemlock trees are dominating here, and there's very few trees coming up underneath them, just these ferns. So the deep shade sure makes it more pleasant on a hot summer day, and provides a nice habitat for plants that like cooler weather, like the birches. Well, the 4 hours I've been back here at Conkles Hollow, I am not finding a lot of maple trees either of any of the varieties that are found in this area. But what I am finding the most is the red maple. We'll zoom in here a little bit, which doesn't surprise me. This is thin soil up here, and the red maple tends to do better in the thin soil than the sugar maple does. And the leaves are have a jagged edge like a torn piece of paper with a V-shaped notch between the lobes. And if that were sugar maple, it would have rounded notches between the lobes. We'll keep an eye out for sugar maple. I think most of the trails I'm going to do today, I wouldn't expect to find it. Either the shade is too deep, or the soil is too thin, or both. But this is our red maple. It's a common tree throughout the eastern United States in all kinds of different habitats, wetlands, and on these hillsides with thin soil. And about a quarter mile past that red maple tree, we did find some sugar maple. It hasn't been absent on this hike, but I hadn't seen more than a couple of these seedlings along the trail. But now there's a whole grove of them right here, with the notches that are rounded between these lobes. And it doesn't have that appearance of a torn piece of paper. Both these trees get a beautiful color in the fall. Sugar maple more of a goldish orange, and the red maple lives up to its name. It turns a bright crimson red, but the sugar maple is actually kind of coming into this woods here, and it's succeeding some of these other trees that have passed away, including what looks like some dead ashes in here. So sugar maple is very common in the area covered by this channel, but on this hike it hasn't been that common. But where you find one, you usually find many more. Tends to come in groves. The bark is a smooth light brown color until it gets older, and then it gets fissures and plates in it, like the red maple as well. I've got some segments on this channel on how to tell them apart in the wintertime and by bark only, but the leaves make it very easy as well. And after spending 4 hours touring the Conkles Hollow area, I'll move to the main attraction at Hocking Hills State Park. It's definitely the busiest trail and the most popular and the most scenic. This is the area around Old Man's Cave and the gorge created by the stream that creates the cave, which is an overhanging rock. It's not actually a cave that you walk in for a long distance, but it is a large rock overhang. Speaking of overhangs, we got a pitch pine. So a second species of pine overhanging this gorge here. And it's got much longer needles and larger cones than the Virginia pine we looked at Conkles Hollow. These needles come in bundles of 3. They tend not to twist around each other, but stay straight, and they're about 4 to 5 inches long with a much larger cone as well. And we've got our eastern white pine growing right on the other side of this bridge here with its needles of 5. And I won't try to pull one down right now, but if you look at those needles, they have a nice white stripe down the middle that makes it look white, hence the name white pine. And there's a large waterfall here. This is the upper falls at Old Man's Cave. It's a nice big swimming hole at the bottom. And just below where we observe those pine trees is the view of the upper falls at Old Man's Cave here. It's about 20 feet of fall there. kind of low flow, but it goes down to nothing if we don't get rain during the late summer and early fall. It'll go down to no water at all, but often after heavy rains it's gushing, and they've got plenty of bridges to keep you out of the high water on this trail, but if it gets extremely high they do have to close it. Let's continue our tour of this popular destination here at the Hocking Hills State Park. You can see we got all kinds of people here on a warm summer day, and I'm glad they're enjoying it. And down in the hollow here at the Old Man's Cave at Hocking Hills State Park, we've got many of the trees we found at Conkles Hollow, but larger. This area could have never been logged because of the cliffs, and we've got some massive hemlocks here. Fortunately, are still healthy, 3 feet in diameter, and some pretty large black birch over here as well. Back where those people are, reaching towards the sky, 80-90 feet high. So, very popular place, but for good reason. And an interesting understory tree that really likes these cooler, moister locations in the mid-Ohio Valley and lower Great Lakes is our alternate leaf dogwood. It's got some berries on it that have already turned blue. We'll zoom in a little bit here. I've got some right in front of me as well here. So this was a nice white flower in mid-May. Now it's got the berries that go from green to blue. And then in somebody's belly, I'm sure, because there was probably a lot more than that a few weeks ago. And I did a fairly detailed study of this alternate leaf dogwood when it was in bloom back in May. And looked at it again in June when I was recording roughleaf dogwood. Don't think roughleaf would be found in this part of Ohio, certainly not in this habitat here. But this is not as common as the one that we all know well, the flowering dogwood, which blooms in mid to late April. But it's more common to our north, and in the right habitat it can be found commonly in this part of the region as well. And we've got plenty more of our witch hazel growing here. It's pretty much scattered throughout this park. It's one of the more common understory plants in this park. And here we are looking up at it with those leaves that look almost like a potato chip. And again, it blooms in the late fall. And you can actually see some of the fruits here between those leaves. That's what's left of the fruits that formed over the winter and early spring on our witch hazel. And the hemlock and black birch that we've seen several times today continue through this Old Man's Cave gorge. They're reaching towards the sky, and the actual cave is a large rock overhang in the background there. It doesn't go too far back, but it is enough that an old man lived in there at one time, according to the park literature here. Just incredible engineering feats to build a trail through a gorge this narrow and rocky. There's actually places where they tunneled through this sandstone to build these trails. And there's more of our black birch as we look up here. And our hemlock and black birch with a little bit of yellow birch in the mix, but not a lot. Continue all the way down the gorge of the Old Man's Cave Creek to the lower falls, which is probably about 40 or 50 feet high, considerably higher than the upper falls, with a similarly sized swimming hole at the bottom. And as you continue beyond the lower falls there at Old Man's Cave, the trail gets lesser used. And there's a new trail that goes to Whispering Cave, where I'm going to be heading next. But, you know, the birches and the hemlocks continue throughout this park in the valleys. Up on the ridges, as we showed at Conkles Hollow, there are different trees, but the hemlocks are up there as well. Well, this black birch here, folks, the seeds from the parent tree landed on top of this 15-foot high boulder, and the roots started seeking ground and seeking soil. And obviously there was enough soil to get it started, but as it got older, the roots made its way all the way down to the bottom of this 15-20 foot high boulder and then found real soil. So birches often grow on rocks. The yellow birch and the black birch Will grow on just about anything if there's enough moisture for the plant to survive. So just an amazing plant, and really it's not that big around, but it must have needed some time to get its roots this far down. About a foot diameter tree. So the trees of Hocking Hills, you know, if we could narrow it down to 4 or 5 trees, it would be the black birch, yellow birch, witch hazel, eastern hemlock, and probably the scarlet or chestnut oak to be the most common on this hike so far. These hikes so far. And we'll add some new species if we find them, but that's what's dominating in these valleys here, and that's fine. It's beautiful because of that. And here's some leaves of a tree that I'm working on for this channel. It's going to be a separate video clip coming out about the same time as this trees of Hocking Hills. And I did a lot of work with the elms last winter without leaves. And now I'm working on a clip for American and slippery elm identification in the summertime using foliage and other methods as well. Well, you know, we got the teeth along this bark, these leaves, just like the birches do. The leaves are much larger than the birches. Not as big as my hand on this one. They're not always that big. And it's a very coarse feel. This is our slippery elm. And it feels like a 60 grit sandpaper. There's more information on how to identify that by bark on this channel. But it tends to grow, at least where I'm finding it mostly, is along fence rows where there's farmland and along waterways and moisture soils of mid-slopes where there isn't. And they can get quite large. They do succumb to Dutch elm disease eventually, but they can get 1.5 feet in diameter before that occurs. This guy is just getting started, maybe 25, 30 feet high. I haven't seen any large slippery elms back here today. And I don't know if that's because of Dutch elm disease or other reasons that they're not that big back here. They're interesting trees, and the mushroom hunters know what I'm talking about. It's an indicator of good morel hunting if you start finding slippery elms and American elms in your woods. And I'm going to go ahead and put the wraps on this all-day adventure looking for the common trees and some of the uncommon trees here at the Hocking Hills State Park. When I say Hocking Hills State Park, that means a whole area of not even interconnected, but separate parcels where you can hike. So what's called the Buckeye Trail connects a lot of them, but the scenery is in different parcels that you can drive between or ride your bicycle between. Some are 15 or 20 miles away from where you might be at any one time. I've done about 1/3 of the trails available in this general area called Hocking Hills State Park today. And probably a total of, I'm going to guess, between 7 and 10 miles. I haven't really been keeping track. And looked at a lot of the common trees that we are finding. And the hemlocks and the black birch are what I'm seeing the most of in these ravines. And that Virginia pine and the oaks are common on the summits or on the tops of these ridges. This is a newer trail that comes back to what's called Whispering Cave here, folks. And it's nowhere near as crowded as what we saw at the Old Man's Cave and the falls near it. And it dead ends here, and you can retrace your steps or make a loop. So, great place just to enjoy nature's beauty. And hopefully what I've shown on this video set today will help you appreciate what is that back here. And all the trees I have shown today, with the exception of the serviceberry and the butternut, are on this channel. And you can watch those clips to learn more about those trees if you have such interests.